The Red Dagger. Wat Tyler, John Ball, Joanna Farrour, the Peasants' Revolt, and the City of London's Weapons of Mass Destruction. London's symbol for the hub of global finance in the city, shown on the city's flag to convey heraldic grandeur, comes from a blood-soaked dagger that killed the rebel Wat Tyler, for Tyler had challenged London on behalf of the poor. The dagger survives, and it's on display in Fishmonger's Hall, in the city's secretive mini-state within a state. Its red silhouette is on the city's coat of arms like a trophy, as if Tyler's murder was something to celebrate. But the 100,000 marching on London in 1381 were serfs, objecting to being kept as virtual slaves by feudal equivalents of corporate power, whereby people were caught and taxed to death just for being alive. 100,000 of those on whose exploitation the wealth of feudal society depended, from ploughmen to carpenters to cowmen to sheep shearers, trapped by a bondage that only death ended. So their spokesman Wat Tyler demanded equality. All men should be free, and of one condition. We will be free forever, our heirs and our lands. But instead of sympathy, he aroused suspicion. Wat Tyler was rocking England's power elite to the core through his opposition to the Statute of Labourers. This law kept freeborn Englishmen tied to landlords, whom Tyler would expose as procurers and plunderers. It laid down a fixed maximum wage which employers needed to pay their workers, already reduced by poll taxes levied on every man, woman and child, in an insidious system of systematic abuse. Labourers were forbidden to withdraw their labour, or even to discuss their conditions. To combine together to ask for better wages was illegal, and if you escaped your feudal lord, you faced prison. In his poem, Piers Plowman, the poet William Langland depicted life for manual workers who were landless. They cursed the king and all the king's justices for making laws to grieve labourers. They'd no rest. On May the 30th, 1381, an insurrection was kindled in Brentwood. Essex villages had been making minimal poll tax returns, so royal poll tax commissioners, backed by soldiers, were sent to inquire into their subjects' impudent lack of concern. The unexpected result was that royal clerks and soldiers were ejected from half a dozen villages, as hundreds of poll tax defaulters bonded together to fight what they regarded as state-sanctioned pillage. England's villagers were tired of working morning till night for the benefit of the lord of the manor, unable to buy or sell, move or marry, or grind their own corn without fines and fees and permission from the master. The villagers were unimpressed by the commissioner's status. One was Sir Robert Belknap, Chief Justice of the Common Pleas. Belknap was made to swear on the Bible he'd never take part in any further oppression, and then released. But the poll tax commissioners persisted in their bullying, and although children under 16 were excused, invasive searches were conducted, and any signs of pubic hair meant that the despised tax could be imposed. In the village of Fobbing, the tax collector was met by the inhabitants brandishing longbows and axes. The people of Fobbing would only pay him with arrows instead of their coins of the realm for his taxes. The rebellion quickly spread with more collectors attacked, then shifted to Kent, where Maidstone Castle was torched. With Wat Tyler elected leader, the rebels took Rochester Castle before heading for the power base of a land-owning church. Despite his gathering support from several thousand, Tyler knew that the rising was lacking John Ball. So he stormed Maidstone jail to release the mendicant priest, locked up for preaching a radical revolution for all. The church was a major economic power in England. It owned a third of the land, forests and mines, fisheries and rights of pasture, and it charged cruel rents. John Ball accused it of economic crimes. When the abbot of Burton brutally told his serfs that they owned nothing but their bellies. Ball said, "We are formed in Christ's likeness, and they treat us like beasts," berating such ecclesiastical Machiavellis. "In the beginning all men were created equal," Ball said. "The servitude of man to man was introduced by the unjust dealings of the wicked and contrary to God's will." Then he'd describe how natural justice was traduced. "For if God had intended some to be serfs and others lords, he would have made a distinction at the beginning. Now, like a good husbandman, tilling his field and uprooting the weeds that destroy the grain, they should kill the great lords of the kingdom." He'd prescribe the same medicine for the judges and lawyers. When the great ones have been cut off, Ball glowered, all men would enjoy equal freedom. All would have the same nobility, rank, and power. Ball had no parish, but instead stood in churchyards, denouncing the dragon of exploitation. Railing against the bishops' and abbots' luxurious living, he envisioned an entirely new nation. A New England, freed of prisons and torture chambers, and the executioner's gibbet and block. A New Jerusalem, governed by Christ's beatitudes, without the poor being placed in the dock. He was to preach his message for 25 years, about how life in England might be bettered, despite his frequently being jailed, then excommunicated. To his listeners, he was the people's shepherd. Since John Ball's dream of universal equality was feared, at the first signs of the rising, he was arrested. "Soon I will be released by 20,000 armed men," he prophesied, and Ball was freed by Tyler, just as requested. Then Wat Tyler and John Ball burst into England's cathedral and told Simon Sudbury, Archbishop of Canterbury, "We're here to depose you. We can talk to God directly. We don't need you as our overpaid intermediary." Ball sent messages in rhymed couplets to village after village, each urging insurrection. "John Ball greeteth you all. Understand he hath rung your bell. Come with right and might, and will and skill, and free yourselves from hell." He asked them to cut off the fetters that tied them to the soil, to free themselves from landowners who were the earth's traitors, because, if the land belonged to anyone, it should simply be the collective property of its cultivators. John Ball addressed himself to Piers Plowman and to John Truman, meaning to honest men with some strength of mind, and he invited them all to join him and to chastise Hob the robber, by which he meant the state's officials and their kind. "Stand manlike together in truth," Ball said, "and help truth, and truth shall help you." He urged audacity, since, in his words, England's government held every vice to be a virtue. And protesters were arrested, or as John Ball put it, "Truth hath been set under lock." The church too, he said, was filled with corrupt sheep, and falseness reigneth in every flock. The Black Death had reduced the population by a third, and therefore labour was at a premium. So landlords now demanded even more back-breaking work to make up for low levels of production. But when tied labourers bridled at their ruthless treatment, they could be summoned by government scriveners, imprisoned either for breaking the statute or evading the poll tax. Either way, they ended up as political prisoners. Those who refused to work for the same wage paid before the plague's depopulation of England were marked on the forehead with the letter F for falsity. It was burned deep into the flesh with a brand. On 10th of June, Joan Hancock and Agnes Jakin spoke out against their lives which employers tried to take, only to be fettered and manacled in Canterbury Castle until Tyler and Ball were able to stage a jailbreak. On June 16 in Cambridge, a woman named Marjorie Starr denounced poll tax demands as the devil's works. She seized them, burnt them, then tossed their ashes to the wind, crying, "Away with the learning of clerks." Because, thanks to the learning of clerks, they had their lives signed, sealed, and delivered, and they'd look askance, as hard-won cash was seized by armed agents of a remote king, who'd use it for fighting his fruitless wars with France. When the rebels invaded the houses of great landowners, the first place they went for was the muniment room, filled with the deeds and documents relating to their serfdom. Papers and parchment fell victim to the rebels' new broom. The rebels gathered more followers and overran the Tower of London, freeing prisoners from dungeons and from chains. They found the king's treasurer, Sir Robert Hales, clutching his coffers, and relieved him of his ill-gotten gains.